All right, welcome everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 7th of August, 2024, and this is the Cluster API Karpenter Feature Group meeting. We follow Kubernetes SIG's guidelines, which essentially means please treat everybody as you'd expect to be treated. Please raise your hand to be called on, although it's just the two of us, so it's not that big a deal. Um, so I guess like following up on what we just did in the Cluster API meeting, I demoed the Carpenter stuff and I think we've got a working POC now. So I'm going to focus on doing cleanup this week. And then I will be making the PR to migrate the repo to the Kubernetes SIGs organization, which it seems like I've got good support for. So hopefully that won't be a big deal. And then we can start to get into the other things, which we were just talking about before the recording started, which is the Carpenter integration is highlighting some points of Cluster API that that maybe could use some love or use attention or just use improvement to make the APIs better for applications like Carpenter. And so, yeah, Scott, you were talking about kind of like, it might be nice to see cluster class or to revisit the cluster class discussion about, adding extra resources and having it install things that are specifically non-cluster API. And yeah, like I'm hoping that this will spurn more discussions and more designs in the cluster API community. So that's kind of what I'm hopeful for next.
Yeah, no, I think that'll be super interesting just to give it the best UX around deploying a cluster with the autoscaler as part of it will give us the best UX by far. Right, that has its complexities, but it's something that should definitely be brought back up because we could buid a solution in CAPI that will be agnostic to cluster autoscaler / Carpenter in that way, because we are reutilizing the same plumbing in the end
Right.
today. Now, a question for you, Michael, though. In the demo, you're using the annotations. Does the Carpenter POC also support pulling that from the infra-machine template like Cluster Autoscaler does, or is it purely from the annotations?
Right. I've got like a to-do in there for that. I stubbed that out to begin with because only the KubeMark provider implements it right now. And I wanted to be able to test it in some other places. So like I didn't put that logic in, but yes, like that's one of the issues that will be kind of the first things to solve. I've got a bunch of to-dos in the code, and I just didn't go the extra route of having it plumb through the infrastructure machine templates because getting those things is not it's kind of annoying in some respects because you have to use the unstructured interface to get them. And
Right.
I was using like kind of the CAPI objects right out of the CAPI the kind of vendored package. So like so far the way I've had the Kube client working is using all structured calls to get things and whatnot. And I just didn't, in the interest of time and whatnot, I didn't go into that. But yeah, that'll be one of the next things to do for sure.
Yeah. No, that'll be exactly. Listen, it's less also of a top priority considering only KubeArk does, but I think Stefan said that the plan is in CapV to add that in soon as well. So hopefully providers will start adding that in, especially with Carpenter and the deeper integrations with autoscaling and CAPI.
Yeah, that's definitely it's on my list of to-dos. I think I got to the point where I started to see the finish line and I was like, you know what, let's get a minimally viable thing working and then we can kind of pivot from there.
Definitely. Definitely. No, this will be super interesting. I'm definitely going to be getting my hands on it shortly and start playing with it with a bunch of different providers that I use.
I'll be really curious to hear how it acts with like other providers because right now I've just been testing with KubeMark, but my next step, and because of the way the create logic works, I had to kind of back off after talking with the Carpenter devs. I had to back off the idea I originally had, which was for kind of like an asynchronous create mechanism. So right now that create call is kind of blocking, waiting for the machine object to be created. And Carpenter is very fast about this. So I'll be curious to see like once I start playing with it with like, proper providers, I'll be curious to see how some of these like, some of the logic behaves and we might have to change some of these things and we'll see what happens, I guess.
Yeah. So it's basically just a blocking call where you're then sending the request to create, you're scaling up the machine deployment and then returning back. It can't be done async like we had thought.
Right. Like I talked, we might be able to do it async, but after talking with the Carpenter devs, they told me that Carpenter does use the provider ID internally as a key in one of its like internal caches. So I thought, you know what? Like, I don't want to have to solve another problem. Why don't I just make the
Right.
create call? It increases the replicas and then just goes into like a poll for like with a timeout of like a minute or something like that. It polls to look for the new machine object that's created, and then pulls the provider ID from that and gives it back. If we learn
Oh,
or if we work with the Carpenter people and we kind of improve the asynchronous behavior, then I think it would be better to kind of like improve our thing so that it can be more asynchronous. But
yeah.
this is working for now.
Yeah. I can tell you, like, Tap V by a bunch of environments that we've installed, it can take up to 3 minutes to get a provider ID, depending.
Oh wow.
Um,
Okay.
right? Because there can be challenges where, depending on the cloning of a template, right, in the vSphere world and all of that, and I guess it's the same thing with, KubeVirt and all of those. The second that you start doing block-based copies, depending on your storage technologies and how long it takes to copy the VM over until the VM gets created, gets its VM BIOS UID, which is then used in the vSphere world in CapV, or whatever is used in KubeVirt. I'm not sure what's used in the KubeVirt provider. Um, but because that initial copy of the template can take a while, unlike in the public clouds where it's nearly instantaneous, that can take a while. My guess is in bare metal clusters, it's going to take a while as well.
Yeah, like
Um,
this isn't going to be very useful for bare metal like currently because
E-
yeah, it can take forever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bare metal it isn't, but where it would is in the vSpheres,
Yes.
KubeVirts, Nutanixes, cloud stacks of the world that have providers. Um, is that configurable today, that 1 minute limit, or is that a hard coded value
I just
currently?
hard coded it as a minute, but
Okay.
maybe we should make it configurable.
I would say that's probably something, just thinking that we would probably want as a flag that we could pass into the deployment of, like, max wait for provider ID or something like that that is defaulted to 1 minute.
Yeah.
Because I think hopefully we shouldn't have cases where it takes more than a minute, but just knowing environments where, depending on your vCPU to CPU ratios and what your storage systems are, I've
Right.
seen really bad performance in some environments.
Okay, yeah, like I'll definitely, this is good notes because like once I get the repo transferred to Kubernetes SIGs, I'm going to start making issues of things that, need to be fixed and whatnot. So this is a good one that we can add in there and, we could probably it should be fairly easy to add it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And yeah, no, definitely. But I will hopefully I should have time over the next few weeks, and I'll be able to test it out and give some feedback as well once I test it with, Kappa, CapZ, CapV, uh, Cloud Stack, bunch of different
Awesome.
ones that I
Yeah,
use.
that's exciting. I love to hear it. I can't wait to kind of see how it performs and how it breaks and whatnot. Like that'll be the good stuff.
Exactly. I've been using Keda mostly as my auto scaling,
Oh,
actually alongside Cluster Autoscaler. I use both of them currently on all of my clusters.
wow, interesting. Are you using Kata to manipulate like machine deployments and whatnot?
I am. I'm using
Wow.
Kata to manipulate the machine deployments during off hours of all dev clusters, where I bring it out of bounds of the cluster autoscaler scaling.
Wow.
And then, because what I basically use is just the cron trigger of Kata,
Yeah.
and then I'll bring it out of bounds from that, from what Cluster Autoscaler allows. And
Right.
then at the beginning of working hours, I'll add it back as the minimum of Cluster Autoscaler's bounds. And then it'll go back in there, start doing its job again, and then, work from there.
That's awesome. I love to hear it because like I'm always hearing people talk about using Kata for cluster auto scaling, and so like I love hearing the actual, the hard details there. That's really cool. What a great use for it too,
Yeah, and I think Keda is a cool idea. It has a serious lacking though in a capability for cluster auto scaling beyond a use case like that because it doesn't have the internal logic that the cube scheduler does that is basically just copied over into cluster autoscaler, for example.
Yeah.
So you could build custom Prometheus rules or New Relic or whatever system you're using and build those rules to do the auto scaling. But there really is a challenge with predictive auto scaling, I think, which is why everything is reactive.
Right. Right. Still though, I
Right.
think the
So
application that you've come up with for it is like that sounds almost perfect, because you can just save a little bit of money in the off hours there, right?
exactly. Why pay for the resources during off hours? We always bring it back to the minimum at the beginning of the day. And by bringing it back to the minimum, we'll let Cluster Autoscaler do its thing and we'll never spend more money than we need.
Right.
But, so it just works really well. Obviously, it doesn't have the what it doesn't have the ability to do is like cluster autoscaler with adding the specific annotation onto specific nodes of which one are labels that we want it to delete. So you're lacking that capability.
Right.
Um, but for dev clusters, I'd say that doesn't really matter. And in my mind, if someone creates nodes or pods that are standalone or non-evictable pods in a dev cluster, I have no problem deleting them from them on dev clusters.
Right.
On prod clusters, I would never do it, but on a
Sure.
dev
Right.
cluster, it's like, okay, so you created a standalone pod, it can go bye bye.
And totally. Totally. Yeah. No, great application for it though. Like it's really cool to hear.
I wonder if that would work with Karpenter, and that's something that I'll check because there is the min and max in Karpenter as well within a node class.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Like I haven't seen how Carpenter reacts when you pull the node pool like out of, like below the minimum basically. Like does it just start
Right.
ignoring it, like
It,
cluster autoscaler or
Right. That's one of the things that I'll be testing to see because that'll be something that's going to be important to document because that's been also a way, even without Keda, that we've used with cluster autoscaler when there are issues in the cluster or something. Change the min max annotations of cluster autoscaler on the machine deployment and then just bring it out of range.
right.
Um, and that way we have static whatever for during a time when there's an issue or we need to debug or whatever it is. That's a nice feature. I wonder if that's possible or if they may have like some pause annotations or something that I have to look at.
Right. There might be a condition you can put on the node pool that causes it to go into a pause state. Because I think there's like a ready condition you could set to false, and then Carpenter will stop evaluating that node pool, I think.
Okay. Yeah, no. So that'll be extremely interesting to see how they act with that. But we'll see shortly once I get around to testing it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I guess that's about it for me. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Nope, nothing else.
Okay,
Sounds
well,
good. Awesome demo today.
yeah, I guess like safe travels. Hopefully I'll see you next week and we can maybe talk more about some of this stuff face to face. Uh,
Definitely.
and otherwise I'll see you in the upstream.
Awesome. Sounds good. Talk to you later.
All right.
Thanks.
Later, Scott.
Bye bye.
Bye.